She's the woman next door who can unravel everything about me, and I'm not sure I want to resist. The first time I noticed her, I wasn't even sure I should have. I was lounging on my balcony, the late afternoon sun warming my shoulders, a cup of coffee sweating lightly in my hand. That's when she appeared in the yard next door, effortless, like a character stepping out of a story I didn't know I wanted to read. She was in her early 40s, tall and confident, yet there was a softness to the way she moved, a quiet grace that seemed to belong to her alone. She leaned casually against the porch railing, her hair catching the sun in reddish gold streaks, and I felt an inexplicable jolt, like the world had just shifted slightly, enough that my calm afternoon unraveled. She laughed at something unseen, a sound that slipped over the fence and lodged in my chest. It wasn't loud, just genuine, tinged with mischief, and it made me notice everything about her, the curve of her smile, the slight lift of her eyebrow as though she was sharing a secret with the world. For a long moment I just watched, pretending to sip my coffee while stealing glances. And then, her eyes found mine. They were bold, dark, curious, and strangely knowing, and in that fraction of a second, I felt both exposed and caught in a way I wasn't used to. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. Instead, she tilted her head, a sly smile tugging at her lips, and whispered, though I wasn't sure if it was meant for me, "I can ruin your calm, say yes." The words floated through the air between us, teasing, challenging, and I felt my heartbeat accelerate. There was something dangerous in them, something I wasn't supposed to entertain, but the thrill of it wrapped around my chest like a warm, addictive tension. I went inside, telling myself it was nothing. A casual neighborly glance. But her presence lingered. I noticed how the sunlight framed her figure, how she moved with deliberate ease, every motion measured yet natural, like a cat stretching in quiet confidence. She had a way of occupying space without seeming to try, and it left me restless, imagining what it might be like to cross that invisible line she'd drawn with her whisper. Over the next few days, I found myself seeking her out in small ways, catching her in the yard, leaving my trash bins just a little later so our paths would cross, pretending to check my phone when really I was hoping for a chance to exchange another glance. Each encounter was brief, yet it left a trace of warmth, a subtle electricity that made ordinary moments feel charged. The air around her seemed different, like it carried secrets I wasn't yet allowed to know but desperately wanted to. And somewhere deep inside, I realized this was no ordinary curiosity. This was the beginning of something slow, something dangerous in the sweetest way, a pull I wasn't ready to resist. I didn't know how, or when, or even if it would matter, but the moment her eyes met mine again, that whispered invitation still echoing, I knew my calm would never be the same. After that first encounter, I couldn't stop noticing her. It wasn't that she did anything extraordinary, at least, not in the traditional sense. She simply existed, and somehow, that was enough to pull me in. The next morning, I saw her trimming her small garden, sunlight glinting off the scissors as she moved with precise ease. She didn't see me at first, and I allowed myself the indulgence of watching her quietly, fascinated by the simple elegance of her movements. There was a rhythm to the way she worked, methodical but unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world, an attribute that seemed entirely foreign to me. Later that week, I ran into her at the mailbox. It was one of those awkward, narrow spaces where brushing past someone feels inevitable. Our hands collided over a package, and for the briefest moment, I felt the warmth of her skin against mine. It was startling, not in a shocking way, but in a way that left a trace, like sunlight lingering on a cold wall. She looked up at me, those dark, confident eyes holding mine just a fraction longer than necessary. She smiled, a little mischievously, and murmured, "Careful. You're too tense." The encounters kept coming, each seemingly coincidental yet charged with subtle tension. She'd be sitting on her porch with a book in the golden afternoon light, and I'd find myself lingering near my window just to watch her flip a page, the corners of her lips lifting at a private joke. Or she'd be walking down the street, hands tucked into her jacket pockets, and I'd feel an almost magnetic pull toward her, an urge to linger nearby even if we weren't speaking. There was a playfulness in the air, a quiet teasing, that made me simultaneously nervous and exhilarated. One evening, we both ended up at the same corner cafe. I was buried in a book, trying to ignore the heat rising in my chest, when I realized she had chosen the table next to mine. She didn't move closer, she didn't need to. The proximity alone was enough to make my fingers tighten around my coffee cup. At one point, our knees brushed beneath the table, a subtle, accidental touch, but it left an echo, a fluttering awareness that neither of us could quite ignore. It was in these moments, the small, everyday interactions, that I began to understand her. She was confident, yes, but she also seemed quietly vulnerable, like she was daring the world to notice her fully while keeping a fragment of herself protected. I found myself wanting to reach that fragment, to understand it, even if I wasn't entirely sure I was allowed. And she noticed me noticing. There were times when her gaze would meet mine across the yard or the sidewalk, slow and deliberate, her lips curling into a small, knowing smile. A glance that said, without words, I see you. I see everything you feel. It was a game neither of us could fully name, and yet it bound us together in the quietest, most thrilling way. By the end of the week, I realized that I was waiting for these encounters, small, accidental, electric. The pull between us had grown, invisible but undeniable. Each brush of hands, each lingering look, each shared smile built a tension that hovered like charged air, making even the simplest moments feel significant. I hadn't said a word about it to anyone, but in the privacy of my own thoughts, I knew one thing: she was unraveling my calm, just as she had promised. It happened one evening when the air was warm but heavy, the kind of evening that makes you notice every detail: the scent of jasmine from her garden, the low hum of distant traffic, the faint rustle of leaves in the soft wind. I had stepped outside for some air, thinking I could escape the restlessness that had been building since the first time she whispered her invitation. Instead, I found her leaning against the fence, watching me with that same mischievous glint in her eyes. "Still hiding in your own world?" she asked, voice low, teasing, but not unkind. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but the truth was, I was anything but composed. She stepped closer, just a little, far enough that our shoulders brushed. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent a ripple of warmth up my arm, reminding me again of the tension I couldn't ignore. There was a pause, heavy and charged, before she spoke again, softer this time. "You know, I know what I do to people," she admitted, eyes flicking to the ground for a moment before meeting mine again. "But I've never met someone who doesn't run." The words stopped me in my tracks. Her bad girl reputation, the teasing, the hints of danger, they weren't just playful facades. They were armor, carefully built to protect something deeper, something she rarely revealed. And yet here she was, opening a crack in that armor, just for me. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard, stirring something inside me that I wasn't prepared to face. I wanted to respond, to tell her that I wasn't running, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, feeling the weight of the space between us, aware of every subtle movement, the tilt of her head, the faint rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers brushed lightly against the fence. There was a gravity in her presence, a pull that made hesitation feel both impossible and necessary. She noticed my hesitation, and a small, knowing smile curved her lips. "It's okay," she said, voice gentle now, almost tender. "You don't have to decide anything right now." But even as she spoke, I felt the unspoken tension hanging in the air, the acknowledgement that we were both aware of what was simmering beneath the surface. I realized then that this wasn't just about curiosity or attraction. It was about vulnerability, about learning to navigate the delicate balance between desire and restraint, between what the heart wants and what the mind cautions against. And yet, despite the careful boundaries we both maintained, the moments of closeness, the accidental brushes of hands, the lingering looks, the soft laughter exchanged, were undeniable. They hinted at a connection deeper than either of us could articulate. As she stepped back slightly, giving me space while still holding my gaze, I felt a quiet understanding settle between us. The tension hadn't dissipated; if anything, it had intensified, more profound and intricate than before. And in that moment, I understood something important. This slow, careful dance between us, the curiosity, the hesitation, the subtle touches, was the beginning of something far more meaningful than either of us had yet admitted. She tilted her head one last time, her dark eyes locking with mine, and whispered almost to herself, "Don't run. Not from me." And for the first time, I felt the stirrings of courage, not the courage to act recklessly, but the courage to lean in, to let the quiet pull between us guide the next steps. It started as a casual challenge, though nothing about it felt casual. I had been walking past her yard when she appeared at the edge of her porch, arms crossed, leaning lightly against the railing with that familiar mischievous spark in her eyes. The evening was quiet, the air tinged with the scent of freshly cut grass and lingering sunlight. I slowed my steps, unsure if I was imagining the tension that seemed to hum between us. "You ever do anything reckless?" she asked suddenly, her voice low, teasing, but with an edge that made my stomach tighten. I raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. "Reckless?" I echoed, trying to sound casual, though my heart betrayed me with a faster beat. She took a step closer, and the space between us seemed to shrink despite the open air. "Yeah," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Something unexpected. Something that might ruin your calm for good." Her words sent a ripple of both fear and thrill through me. I hesitated, aware of the cautious voice in my head warning me to step back. But there was something magnetic about her presence, the way her dark eyes held mine as if daring me to respond. My own curiosity pushed against that hesitation, a quiet insistence that I couldn't ignore. "Like what?" I asked, almost whispering, though my voice sounded louder than I intended. She smiled, the kind of smile that made it impossible to look away. "Come to the little street fair tomorrow night," she said. "With me. No excuses. Say yes, and maybe I'll show you a side of life you're too careful to notice." Her words lingered in the air, teasing and tempting, and I felt my pulse quicken. The next day, I found myself unable to think about anything else. Every mundane moment, the hum of the refrigerator, the click of my keyboard, the rustle of leaves outside my window, felt charged with anticipation. When I approached the corner of her yard that evening, she was already there, leaning casually, as if she had been expecting me. And I realized, almost with a shiver, that saying yes wasn't just agreeing to an event. It was agreeing to step into her world, to accept the subtle pull she exerted, to risk the unknown tension simmering between us. The night of the fair, we walked together, side by side, the crowd around us blurring into background noise. I noticed the soft brush of her arm against mine, the way her hand occasionally lingered near mine without quite touching. Every shared laugh and playful nudge deepened the current of connection between us. She teased me about being overly cautious, and I teased back, though my nerves betrayed the thrill of proximity. At one point, she leaned in, her breath warm against my ear, and whispered, "See? I told you I could ruin your calm." The words were soft, almost intimate, and the subtle touch of her hand brushing mine as we walked left me momentarily dizzy with awareness. It was a dare, yes, but also an unspoken acknowledgement of the tension we'd been nurturing, and a quiet invitation to let it grow. By the time the evening ended, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about thrill or mischief. The dare had been a test, a way to measure whether I was willing to step closer to her world and, in turn, step closer to the feelings that had been quietly building between us all along. And for the first time, I felt the pull to lean in, to meet her halfway, to accept that maybe, just maybe, my calm was meant to be beautifully, irrevocably unraveled. A quiet rain had settled over the neighborhood that evening, soft and persistent, like a rhythm meant for reflection. I found myself standing under the small awning of her porch, waiting as she returned from running errands. Her hair was damp at the ends, clinging slightly to the nape of her neck, and the scent of rain mixed with her perfume reached me in a way that made my chest tighten. She smiled as she saw me, a mixture of warmth and mischief, though there was something softer in her expression tonight. "Thought I might find you here," she said, voice low, playful but tinged with curiosity. I shrugged, trying to act nonchalant, but my fingers betrayed me, tapping nervously against the railing. She laughed softly, the sound mingling with the rain, and then leaned against the railing beside me. The closeness was electric, yet comfortable, the kind of nearness that made ordinary air feel heavier, charged with possibility. We didn't speak for a few moments, simply listening to the rain. Then, almost without warning, she shifted her gaze to me, and I noticed a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "I don't usually let people see this side of me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes, dark and direct, searched mine as if testing whether I could handle the truth. "I'm used to keeping control, keeping the world at a distance. But you make it hard to do that." I felt a sudden ache of awareness, realizing that the woman I had labeled as untouchable or dangerous had her own fears, her own need for connection. It made me want to step closer, to show her that I wasn't intimidated, that I could be the person she trusted enough to lean on. "I'm not going anywhere," I said softly, letting my hand hover near hers, unsure if she would accept the gesture. Her fingers brushed against mine, tentative at first, then more certain, and the warmth of that touch sent a quiet thrill through me. It wasn't a dramatic declaration, it was a shared acknowledgement, a moment of intimacy that didn't need words. "I like that," she whispered, and I felt her shoulder nudge mine, light but deliberate. It was the kind of closeness that lingered in your chest, the kind that left both of us aware of the distance that had disappeared between us, if only slightly. We moved inside to the kitchen, the rain still drumming softly on the windows. I watched her prepare tea, the mundane task becoming intimate in its quiet familiarity. Our conversation wandered, first small talk, then deeper thoughts, fears and regrets we usually kept to ourselves. The more she shared, the more I realized that this teasing, confident woman had layers that only a few would ever see. And in letting me see them, she was letting me in, closer than I had ever been. When she finally handed me a warm cup, our hands met again, lingering this time, either of us pulling away. I could feel the pulse of her wrist, the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat against the back of my hand. For the first time, I felt that the playful tension between us had shifted into something softer, something human. She had let down her guard, and I wanted nothing more than to stay in this space with her, to honor the vulnerability she had shown, and to let my own walls fall just enough to meet hers. By the time the rain had eased into a gentle drizzle, we were sitting side by side, shoulders brushing, hands entwined almost naturally. It was subtle, it was ordinary, and yet it was entirely extraordinary. I realized then that the connection we were building wasn't about dares or mischief anymore. It was about trust, understanding, and a closeness that neither of us had anticipated, yet both had quietly craved. The tension had been simmering quietly for weeks, subtle but undeniable, until one evening it broke through in a way I hadn't anticipated. I was walking back from a late shift, tired but restless, when I noticed her on the porch, leaning against the railing with a thoughtful expression. Her eyes met mine, and I felt the familiar pull in my chest, a mixture of anticipation, excitement, and the nervous edge of something unspoken. As I approached, she spoke, voice steady yet soft. "You've been distant lately," she said. It wasn't an accusation, more an observation, but it struck me with surprising force. The truth was, I had been retreating into my own thoughts, questioning whether what I felt for her was right, appropriate, or sustainable. The whispers of judgment, the awareness of the age gap, the societal expectations, all of it pressed in. But here she was, looking at me with that same steady confidence, challenging me to face it. "I'm not sure," I began, then stopped, words faltering. I wanted to articulate the storm inside me, the hesitation, the desire, the fear, but she tilted her head, her gaze never wavering, and waited. That silence was more powerful than any sentence I could have formed. "I don't care what anyone else thinks," she said finally, stepping closer so that our shoulders brushed. The warmth of her presence was grounding, yet electric, making my pulse jump in a way I could no longer ignore. "I want this. I want you." "Do you want me too, or are you going to hide behind your calm forever?" Her words hung in the air, daring me, inviting me to act, to make a choice that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I could feel the subtle heat of her hand brushing mine, the gentle pressure that made it impossible to retreat. And suddenly, everything I had been thinking about, rules, fears, doubts, melted in the intensity of the moment. I do, I admitted, voice low but firm, my heart hammering as I finally allowed myself to speak the truth I had been holding back. She smiled, a mixture of relief and satisfaction, and stepped even closer, until the space between us was electric with proximity. Her hand found my cheek, fingers soft and warm, her thumb brushing lightly against my skin in a gesture that grounded me while making my chest swell with emotion. We didn't rush, didn't speak immediately, letting the tension settle into something tender, something intimate. Her forehead rested lightly against mine, her breath mingling with mine, and I felt the quiet reassurance of her heartbeat against the side of my face. It was a simple, human closeness, yet charged with everything we had been building: curiosity, attraction, trust, and the thrill of crossing the invisible boundary we had been circling. This is real," she whispered, as if confirming it for both of us. I nodded, understanding fully that the playful tension, the whispered dares, the small brushes of hands, all of it had led to this moment. The realization hit me with clarity: what we shared was more than attraction. It was connection, emotional depth, and the courage to step into something neither of us could have anticipated but both of us needed. We stayed there, close and quiet, letting the acknowledgement of our feelings linger, our fingers entwined, our shoulders pressed together. In that charged stillness, I realized that the slow-burn tension between us had reached its apex, not in a dramatic climax, but in a quiet, undeniable truth. We were both ready to embrace whatever this connection would bring, together. The days that followed felt like stepping into a new rhythm, one that was quiet, comforting, and charged with a warmth I hadn't known I was missing. Our playful tension had shifted into something deeper, something more human. The dares and teasing glances still lingered, but now they were layered with understanding, with trust, and with the ease that comes when two people have finally allowed themselves to belong, even briefly, in each other's space. One late afternoon, we found ourselves sitting together on her porch swing, the soft, golden light of the sun spilling across her hair. She leaned against my shoulder, light and unassuming, and I felt the slow, steady pulse of her presence. Her hand found mine naturally, fingers intertwining as if this closeness had always been meant to happen. The world outside, the distant traffic, the rustle of leaves, the low hum of the neighborhood, faded away, leaving only the quiet intimacy between us. "I never thought calm could feel like this," I said, my voice low, half to myself, half to her. She tilted her head, resting her cheek lightly against my chest, and smiled. There was a softness in her expression, a quiet relief, and I realized that the moments of hesitation, the whispered dares, the brushes of skin, had all led to this steady, grounding connection. We shared small, everyday routines together, making coffee in the morning, exchanging knowing smiles as we passed on the sidewalk, lingering in casual conversations that somehow felt significant. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand gestures, no sudden confessions meant to overwhelm. It was the gentle accumulation of presence, the small touches, the warmth of proximity, that built the emotional architecture of our relationship. One evening, she caught me looking at her from the doorway, a soft smile playing at her lips. "You're staring again," she teased, though her tone was affectionate, not chiding. I laughed, feeling the comfort of our familiarity. "Just taking it all in," I said. She leaned closer, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear, and I felt the quiet electricity of that gesture, the same intimacy we had discovered weeks ago, now natural and unforced. We walked together under streetlights on calm nights, shoulders brushing, hands occasionally grazing, and each touch carried the memory of every shared glance and moment of vulnerability that had led us here. There was no need to rush. The slow burn had matured into something steady, a warmth that lingered long after our time together. In that rhythm, I realized the beauty of what we had discovered. The bad girl next door had been more than a tease or a challenge. She had been a mirror to my own hesitation, a catalyst for trust and closeness. And in letting ourselves be seen, we had created a bond that was quiet, intimate, and deeply human. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, she leaned against me, whispering, "I could ruin your calm again, but I think we've found something better." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle in my chest. Our calm was no longer fragile. It was ours, built together, and it was infinitely more beautiful for having been unraveled. And there, in the warm glow of shared presence, with fingers entwined and shoulders pressed together, I knew that this was exactly where I was meant to be, close to her, in a quiet love that had grown patiently, slowly, and completely.